And so the first question really is around alternative proteins. And the question was about, Emily showed a survey, and the question was, have there been some meaningful consumer surveys about alternative proteins and specifically around the issue of sustainability? Do consumers generally perceive that as sustainable?
The first answer to the first question is yes, there have been some surveys done. A lot of them are found in the scientific literature, research studies that have been done. A lot of them, I think, coming out of Europe and the UK as to consumers' perceptions. To the second part of the question on sustainability, I really don't know. I would have to go back and look at the surveys a little more carefully, but there are some surveys that are out there, and I think there have been. Some time ago, I was reading a survey even around the issue of cell-cultured meat, and they were questioning consumers about, what they would think of such a technology.
Okay. The next question was for Emily, and it was asking about the timing for FDA approval as we talk about CRISPR and how far out are we in terms of really getting to market with some meaningful volume?
Sure. So there's some fundamental just building blocks. So FDA, it was one step in sort of that 11-step process that I was describing earlier, requires 3 years of heritability. So for the pig life cycle, 3 generations of heritability, and for the pig life cycle, that's essentially 3 years from when we submit that part of the regulatory framework proposal. So, I think what we've officially been saying is that we're probably several plus years away from commercialization with any meaningful market access. I would say we're probably in the realm of 4 to 5. We're really targeting likely 2022 or 2023 before we're able to be selling pigs here in the U.S. I think there's some factors internationally that could allow for several of those international markets I mentioned to go faster potentially. There's some opportunity with the new Mexican government in place that there might be opportunity to get approval there quicker than we can here in the U.S., which would not only be helpful for our Mexican producers, but would also probably put a lot of pressure on FDA. There's also some wind in the sails in Japan as well. So I think, that timeline could be plus or minus a year or two, but in all reality, we're probably looking at least 5 years.
Okay. One more question for you, Emily. Don't put down the microphone. So actually, there's 2 questions. One, ASF. Any luck in finding that gene? But ultimately, if the genes are inherited, how does Genus continue to monetize, and how do you maintain that proprietary?
Yeah. So I never thought I would say this, but the ASF question is actually the easier question, so we'll talk about that for a second. So African swine fever, as you know, there was a big announcement today by NPPC that they're canceling, I think for the first time ever, World Pork Expo because of fears about African swine fever. So if you're a pork producer in the market today, it is certainly top of mind. Genus is working to commercialize a gene edit for African swine fever. We're working with our partners over in the UK at the Roslin Institute. Again, I'll use my disclaimer, not a scientist. My understanding of that technology innovation is that it is a little more complicated, if you can imagine that, than PRRS. The work we've done thus far has been able to sort of, PRRS is a complete knockout. So not only are they not carriers of the disease, but they also don't get sick from it. ASF is a little harder to get both. And so Roslin Institute is working very hard on that right now. I know that everyone in the world wishes that ASF would be first in time because that would be massive. And I have a feeling that our regulators in China would adopt that very quickly if that was the case. But we are working on it. What we would say is that that's in the discovery phase. We're also working on bovine respiratory disease, and that I would say is farther ahead than ASF, but certainly nowhere near where PERS is. So PERS will be our first product to market at this point. Regarding the second question about sort of how will Genus continue to monetize this, I think obviously we're investing a huge amount into the technology, and we feel very strongly about its promise. I think, what we're looking at is once we get that regulatory approval is how will we officially bring it to market. And I think there's really two pathways for that. The first is sort of by ourselves and sell that to our existing customers. And obviously we hold the lion's share of the market here in the US and around the world. So that's obviously a very viable pipeline. The second is to sort of license it to our competitors as well and make it so that, that it's even more widely adopted and widely available. So right now we're exploring both of those pathways. I think there's merit to both. And people who are much better at sales and numbers and business cases than I am are running both sets of those scenarios. But again, I think the most important thing and where we're really investing right now is in the regulatory approval process and then in that market approval, because it's, if no one's going to buy the bacon at the end of the day, we're going to have a big challenge. So that's really where we're focused, and that's where my focus is.
Good. Thank you. JJ, for you, the question becomes, as we're talking about telling the story and communicating, you talk about building relationships, but as we continue to adopt more and more technology and innovation, we as an industry become less commoditized and more fragmented, and therefore it's harder as a collective group to tell the message and tell the story. How do we deal with that tension going forward?
Yeah, no, great question. So I think part of it will be also looking for alignment where maybe there hasn't naturally been alignment between organizations. So for example, if there's a technology that, and I was actually at an event last week where we brought together unique individuals, but if you know that you have a technology or an innovation, for example, that positively affects environmental impact, yes, you still want to work with your trade association or governmental entities that have a natural platform to share that information, but are you also working with environmental NGOs? Even if at times there may be topics that NGO and you differ on, but when it comes to environment, you do have not some, or maybe a lot of similarities. So I think that'll be one of the biggest things, is it's looking outside of our traditional network of food and agricultural organizations and leaders and figuring out which are those tangential entities that we can find alignment on. And so, again, it's just going to change it. In my mind, it's going to be a paradigm shift of who are our natural allies and how do we form those relationships proactively so that when something comes up and we need to be able to align or ally with someone, we can.
Okay, great. Alternative proteins. The fake beef products mentioned are found in the freezer section. Are they required to be refrigerated, or is this simply a marketing gimmick?
I assume the question is about the refrigerated ones?
Yes.
Or,
yeah.
Okay.
I assume that's right, yeah.
They would last longer if they were frozen, that's for sure.
It says found in the freezer section. Are they required to be refrigerated, frozen, or is it just a marketing gimmick?
They're required to be frozen.
Yeah.
Well, the frozen ones are, most of them, freeze and extend shelf life. So it's really a shelf life play here. For some of these products, if they were refrigerated, they just don't hold their integrity very well. If you take some of these frozen veggie burgers and you thaw them out, has anybody ever done that before and they get messy, right, some of them. So that's part of the reason they need to be frozen. And of course, there's the added advantage that in the freezer, it'll last for months. But you put it in the refrigerated case, then it becomes a matter of a few days. Now, on the flip side, though, those products like the Beyond Burger that are found in the meat case refrigerated, I think that's very much a marketing play here. don't know if I would go as far as calling it a gimmick, but it's definitely a market play, right? So it's fresh.
It's a strategy.
Right? It's a strategy, exactly. It's a fresh product. The way it's better technology in the sense that they're able to make a product that's refrigerated that won't just fall apart and get all sticky on you, like some of those early generation ones. And so, but of course, I'm sure that they would. It's a shorter shelf life, but it's a strategy that they're invested in, right? To try to really place the product right next to meat.
Yeah.
So,
Other questions? In the meantime, so there's one more question. Is the Impossible Burger the item is from an animal agriculture perspective, is the Impossible Burger the one we should be most focused on as a source of competition?
I would say yes. I think it's the one that, from everything I heard, and again, I need to go down to St. Louis and go to Burger King. Never thought I'd say something like that, but from everything that I've heard, it's probably the closest thing to meat. Of course, it's a burger, right? So you take a Whopper and you put the tomatoes and the ketchup and the lettuce and all that stuff, and you can hide a lot of that in there. So one thing is eating the patty by itself versus a beef patty versus that. But still, all reports that I read are that this stuff is actually pretty close, and they're also in my opinion, they also happen to be I think they're a more transparent company. So, and they're not paying me to say this. I just, from things I've read and seen, and they make no excuse for their product being a product of GMO technology. They know exactly where they want to play. I don't always see them. There's some groups are very antagonistic towards the meat industry and animal ag. And they play off of that, right? Because some of their consumers, their niche market, are, that resonates with people. You're angry about, use of animals for food, so I'm going to play off of that anger. The Impossible Foods, I just don't see that in them. So, that's, so I would say yes. I think it's now, should we be concerned? So here's the thing. My opinion is that these technology, this is not a passing fad. This is here to stay. So the Cargills and Tysons of the world have kind of figured that out. And whether it's a fad or not, they're in there from the beginning, right? So they're in some ways you could argue that they're hedging against the technology as well. But I do believe that there's so many products and these companies are being profitable. I don't think this is a passing fad. So I think it's something that we as animal agriculture need, to learn to live with. And will this in some ways is this threatening to the animal agricultural industry and livestock industry in the future? I'm not sure that I would go that far at this point. I think people are going to continue to eat meat. People are going to continue to demand meat. If cell-cultured meat ever became a real thing, if it ever lived up to all the hype, that could be disruptive, and that could really, But again, they could make all the ground beef they want, but to make it into a steak or something else, that's a whole different thing. So yeah, I would not say. I think Impossible Foods is probably the one we need to be watching. I'm not sure that we need to be terribly concerned. The size of the market is very small. However, though, they're in Burger King now. So, if it works out for Burger King, you bet that if Burger King gets good feedback from their consumers, they're going to expand it. And who knows where it goes from there. So, it's good. I kind of take like a wait and see kind of attitude. I think we may be in a slightly different place in 10 or 15 years.
Dr. Bull.
Rodrigo, don't sit back yet. If, with the exception of using the last case you talked about, where you take an animal-based cell with the protein sequencing that comes with that, if you put that aside and look at the other sources, do you think that there will come a time, and we all remember when we took nutrition about the barrel with one short stave and the water running out, when we were talking about protein and biological value, do you think that there will be an issue in application areas where protein intake isn't at an excess, where you have the luxury of excess amino acids, do you think there'll be a problem with amino acid profile and biological value?
In humans?
Yeah. Or monogastrics of any kind.
I'm not sure that I understand your question correctly, but
if the biological value of a protein that you create from wheat or wherever it is not adequate for whoever or whomever is consuming it, our nutrition tells us we put amino acids in to make that balance up. Is that what you would expect to happen in the case of these alternative proteins?
That's possible. I mean, it's when you're talking about, so you're talking meat, protein from these pulses, which are all these soybeans and lentils and peas and these kinds of things. Definitely, the biological value is not the same. It's lower than pretty much all animal proteins, and so which is part of the concern that if we did away with animal products, I think we will have serious nutritional issues. And the one paper that I reference shows that. And, there's no more complete protein than egg, dairy, and meat. And so if we did away with that, I think we will have a hard time. This is, one point that they make in this, in that one paper is that they talk about, well, a vegan or vegetarian diet may work for individuals. It's a whole different thing when you extrapolate that to an entire population. Okay, so for one individual, this may work for you, and you may be healthy, and you may find a way, but when you try to suddenly say, we're going to change the entire food system, and now everybody is going to eat in this way, then there could be unintended consequences.
JJ, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to add one thing, and this goes back to even the unique allies. So during the conversation about how laying hens are raised, one of the several groups figured out that one of the primary consumers of eggs as a high quality source of protein are underprivileged individuals. And so the unlikely ally of the food system in those conversations was the Urban League and Urban Voter League. So those are entities that are representing underprivileged and what we'd call the working poor, that typically you wouldn't see testifying on legislation in California and other states about how laying hens can be housed. But because they had an interest in ensuring that underprivileged individuals had access to a safe, wholesome, affordable protein supply, and obviously farmers and ranchers and companies that are working with laying hens had an interest in doing what's best for the bird, even if it flies in the face, if you will, of what some people think. Those two groups came together to ensure that protein source, or at least that conversation was being had, I guess I should say. So,
Thank you. Great. Please.
Okay, so this is a provocative question that sort of keeps recycling itself. The American meat industry, the American animal protein industry, has been exquisitely successful for very many years in doing very high quality protein very efficiently at a very low cost point based on our resources. So now I'm going to go to one of your slides, JJ. You said consumers today, and we've already heard that a very large number of them are not in rural America, need to feel unique when they purchase a product. How does a commodity industry that is commodity driven make someone feel unique when they buy a high quality commodity? Because commodity equates to normal, not unique.
correct. I agree. The correct is in my head. So, in my mind, if you as a producer, a food system organization, choose to continue in the commodity business, then you have to identify which consumers are still willing to purchase a normal product, that they're not looking for the story. Maybe that's what makes them a unique consumer, is they're still okay. Because, for example, in the 5 types of consumers, there's comfort seekers. These are individuals that even if they're told that something is bad for them, they're going to continue to eat it because it's comforting to them. They want those types of foods. So then if you choose to go down that line, and I'm not an economist, but if I were, what I would share with you is then you have to be very, very good at operating at low margins. So you're going to have to scale in order to continue to play in the commodity business. But if you want to target consumers who are looking for that unique experience, who are looking to be treated as a unique consumer, then you have to decommoditize your product and figure out, okay, am I going to have the best tasting animal-derived hamburger or whole muscle cut or ground meat cut, and be able to share that story with those unique consumers that meet their attributes? So that's the way I would look at it, that either if you want to play in the commodity business, there still are consumers for you. They may be a minor share, but they're still going to be there. And you just have to be the lowest margin. But then if you want to compete for the unique consumers, especially those that have a higher purchasing power, which we know they do, then you have to decommoditize.
Good. Any other questions?
Can I add on to that comment, though?
Please.
Can you hold on? Wait.
Oh, microphone.
And I might be just getting this a little jumbled here, but so adding on to all these unique products then for all these special people.
Which is all of us. We all like to be unique.
You're your mother's favorite child, right?
Exactly.
Then when you showed us the inverted curve, and when you start getting too many products, then there's the confusion and the mistrust. So then if we start making too many special things for these unique wants, are we going to recreate another problem again in time?
Yes. It's just the new law of having abundance. So, and it's going to continue to, because every time we meet someone's unique need, whether it's a fad or a new trend in diets, there's always going to be something new. I mentioned that we host a lot of dinner parties, and I'll tell you, as a host, and some of you maybe experienced this, we always try to send out a nice note beforehand. Does anybody have any allergies, sensitivities, severe dislikes? There's times that we'll make 4 different desserts because by the time we're handling the dairy-free, gluten-free, vegan, sugar-free crowd, you can't make anything that meets all of those. Well, maybe a toothpick and an ice cube. But then they want to make sure it's ultra-filtered 5 times. So yes, it's going to. It's just. I think it's the new norm we're in, where we're never going to reach a destination where consumers go, "Oh, every issue's been solved." That's just not the environment we're in now. I know. Yeah. Oh, I thought she was saying I was a downer.
I might just add on to that. I do a horrible job of staying in my lane, so I apologize in advance, and I'll try to make this my one outburst for this session. But I have a little bit of a slightly different take on that. And what I would say is this, is I think as sort of quote unquote commodity agriculture, we also need to listen better. And I know it sounds very simple, but if you look at pork, for example, the National Pork Board just published a sort of groundbreaking report on the different dining occasions and the different ways that we as an industry need to innovate. So I don't necessarily think it's all about decommoditizing our product and finding those niche markets. I also think it's about listing. I mean, JJ rattled off the statistic that there's a lot of single-person households in the U.S., myself being one, and yet when I go to the store and look for pork chops, I'm buying packs of 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8. That doesn't work for me as a consumer, and yet we continue to produce and process meat and dairy and eggs in that fashion. And I think what we can learn from some of the alternative proteins is that they listen just a lot better. They're a lot more tuned into data. They're a lot more in tune to consumer buying preferences and trends, to population demographics. They're producing food with unique flavors, which younger consumers, millennials and Gen Zs want. They're providing those eating experiences. They're meeting people where they are. They're producing smaller package sizes. we can be a commodity, but we can still do things differently and meet people where they are, which we need to do. We need to continue to innovate. We need to continue to say, how can we take this pork chop and add a marinade, add a seasoning package, add a box meal preparation, add a delivery service, use Amazon, delivered via drone. I don't know, a million different things. I mean, when's the last time someone went to a restaurant and saw a pork chop on the menu? We need to do better. We need to do better. And so that's not, to me, about decommoditizing our product. It's about listening and being where people are.
Good point.
And taking it head on.
Okay.
And also gene editing. No, I'm just
We have had the pleasure to have a great conference wrapped up by 3 great speakers. Please give them a round of applause.